Hey everybody, it's PD and P-Dubs Unscripted. Welcome to another edition. We're so glad to have you in the house today in the studio.
There's people here with us?
Yeah, they're with us, in body, mind, or spirit. I don't know.
Okay.
So we got them in spirit. It's great to be with you, brother.
Yeah, good to be with you back in our studio here.
I feel like it's been a while for me.
Yeah, it's been. I've had some trying to record with some of my elective kids down here.
Yeah, lately Tuesdays have been like slam days that I can't seem to break away from. But thankfully, you hold up the mantle and keep charging forward.
We try, because I believe this will be episode 98.
Ooh,
So we're getting closer and closer to 100. I think the devil's trying to slow us up on that triple-digit one.
We need to have some kind of celebration on the 100th.
Yeah.
I don't know, like streamers or kazoos or something that we can blow horns.
Well, I have a little recorder I bought when I was in Cambodia.
Okay.
The little wood flute type.
Yeah, man, whatever. A noisemaker of some kind. We should just celebrate.
Have a party.
Yeah, we should. Maybe we could invite all of our previous guests down.
Have a returning guest.
A returning guest gala,
Where they just come down and
they're all here.
Yeah, we don't have that many mics for all at once.
No, they could just all sit in here and then, talk a little or just, be here.
Right. So maybe that's who I was wondering who this episode is sponsored by. Maybe it's our returning guest.
Yeah, it's by all of our 90. Well, we don't know how many guests we've had. Certainly not 90.
Probably in the 20s and 30s, I bet.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've had some recurring guests.
Yes, we have. We have some that call themselves the favorite guests.
Yeah, and we've also had, our number one fan.
Number one fan.
I was talking to one of our youngest guest star, our youngest one. I was talking to his father, and that person said that they could have done a much better job now than when they did that with us the first time.
Always critiquing.
Right.
I wonder what the view count is up on that particular episode.
Well, I think that person doesn't listen anymore because
all right.
they're like, it's not very good.
Okay.
So it's probably on our end. That wasn't very
it probably
good.
was, although we didn't get many words in edgewise.
No, but it was a fun one.
It was.
But it was just funny hearing, him say that.
I know. Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, so any of the recurring guests, the fee to be a sponsor is $5 per person.
All right, that was a new one on me. So,
that's,
hey, we got to make some kind of.
That's how we got to sponsor this thing.
Pay for a cup of coffee or something.
Or a donut. The fees for this lovely, lovely podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's we need sponsorship to pay for our studio time.
Right. It's not cheap to rent this studio.
No, it isn't. I mean, it's quite a studio.
Yeah, those watching, you can see the lovely paneling right behind us there.
It is. I mean, it's a blessing, and it's nice to have colorful paneling because it could have been drab, gray or black, but no, it is quite colorful in the
blue.
And is that a maroon behind you?
I would say a maroon.
Yeah, I have problems with that color. It looks kind of, I don't know, purplish a little or maroonish.
Maroon, like a purplish maroon, maybe.
Yeah. So anyway, great to be back in the house. And but today, friends, we want to talk about something that I would say that we've all gone through to one degree or another, and that is grieving. Whether it's grieving the loss of a loved one or loss of a job. Or the loss of a relationship. But I think today we're probably going to be focusing mostly on just the loss of a loved one. And it is a really difficult thing. And we just wanted to kind of walk through some of the stages of grief that have been determined, by people who endeavor to study grief in its totality. In an effort to help anybody who might be going through a loss at this time and might still be dealing with grief.
Right. Yeah, and I was just looking up when this article was written, just because, you always kind of cares how recent.
Yeah.
And then at the bottom it says, last medically reviewed of May of 2023.
Yeah.
So, fairly recent.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting, last medically reviewed.
Yeah. And there is, I guess we could say the person's name, right? Although we don't know him. Medically reviewed by Lori Lorenz and Kimberly Holland on May 17th of 2023.
Yeah, they're Lori Lorenz is a clinical psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
And then Kimberly Holland is a freelance health, travel, and lifestyle writer.
Okay. So we're grateful to them for putting this up for us to talk about. Certainly, with grief, I was looking up, we host grief share sessions at Emmanuel, and many churches or organizations do that, and it's a wonderful program. And if you are going through grief, we would highly recommend, connecting with a group in your area. It's as easy as Googling online grief share, and you can look at places in the area and get connected. But I know that that's a 13-week program, and they go through all the stages of grief. So I thought, I started with them, but they didn't have anything forthcoming on their website. So this is how I found, the stages. And in this article titled "The Stages of Grief and What to Expect," they talk of 5 stages or 7 stages. So it seems like out in academia or in the research,
there's two ideas of
yeah.
And I wonder,
they're pretty similar.
I was gonna say I didn't look that closely at the article, but I was like, is there any overlapping? Kind of like how in the 10 Commandments, you have, depending on what translation or what denomination you fall to, they kind of lump them a little bit differently, some of the 10 Commandments.
In what I saw, just perusing, there are some that, they have the core 5 and then they add on a couple. And then there's some that have the core, that don't have the core 5, but you can find similarities.
Okay.
So we'll see what this one says. But certainly, grief is something that's very unique to each individual. I mean, there is no prescribed, pathway to grief or timeline.
Right, because everybody grieves in their own way. There's no you're grieving wrong. No, you grieve how God has wired you to grieve, and it looks differently for each of us. Even the time frame. Some do it quicker, some takes longer, and even maybe how they process things of maybe, I need to get rid of everything to help me move on. And some just want to hold on to it longer.
Right. And, some people get stuck in spots of grieving. And, yeah, and while someone on the outside could say, okay, let me help you move past that, that could be a good thing for that person. It might be necessary, but it also might be something where they do still need to be in that stage,
Right. Because you don't want to rush through a stage because then you don't properly grieve, and then you might revert back or not fully heal, even though I don't know if you can ever fully, truly heal, but at least be in a good spot.
Yeah. And, these 5 stages that we're going to be talking about and that we're kind of just saying in terms of a timeline have probably a timeline that is certainly greater than a year, I would imagine. And, if you look at our society, I think our Western culture really has failed in this regard of caring for people going through grief. Because our society, especially in America, is okay, we will give you time to go through your loss. And there's a lot of care and concern and love and prayers and support. But, and I don't know if it's tied to our business world, with you get so many days off for bereavement, right? Or if it's just tied to the pace of our Western culture. But it seems to me that, okay, someone passes away, in comes the church and a funeral home to come alongside the family quickly to go forward with a type of visitation and celebration of life, burial, luncheon, gathering kind of thing. And then everybody comes, and then everybody goes away. And the expectation of, I'll just say, societal expectation is okay, back to work, back to normal life,
But it's not normal for that person because that other person is not part of their life anymore. And so now they have to figure out their new normal.
Exactly. And it just seems
cold.
You and I have been in the middle of that, and many of our listeners have. It's like, okay, I can't even really begin to think of like, well, okay, I guess I got to get back into my normal routine. And cold is an interesting word. But yeah, from a societal standpoint, like, and certainly, to a person, people are still caring.
Right.
But it's like, okay, I've got to go to work. I've got to go do this.
Well, I think of like if you're a student or even like a job that has deadlines, you might get like we were talking about those days of bereavement, but it's not like for like a student, like, oh, you got this test or this paper due. Okay, we'll give you maybe like a week extra.
Yeah.
But you need it in now.
Right.
And you're just like, well, man, what if that person hasn't fully like been able to process? Because as well as I do, when you lose a loved one, you can be in that fog for extended period, depending on the situation of what was the death or what caused that.
Yes.
Where your mind can't truly focus on the task at hand, and here you are required to do whatever to meet some deadline.
Yeah. And and I get it. Like at some point we have to. It is good for us to get back into a pattern of life, which includes our schooling, our work, our activities
everyday
and things,
life.
Right? And that is in itself beneficial and coping, but it is also, if rushed, which I feel, I don't know, maybe in comparison to what we see in Scripture or even other like cultures in our world where there is a longer point of grieving. I think of old classic movies. Like, okay, I'm going to go back to It's a Wonderful Life, right?
Oh, what a gem of a movie.
What a gem. I mean, it's one of PD's favorites, I know.
It's not a bad movie.
No, it's not bad. But in the movie, George's father passes away suddenly, right? Mm-hmm. And did you notice in the movie what George wears shortly after his father dies?
Is it something of his father?
No, he wears a black armband.
Oh.
Well, you're a baseball guy, right? Remember when someone would die in an organization, there would be a black stripe on the sleeve?
Or like any sport where like you might have a patch, like an owner, you might have a patch with their initials. Mm-hmm. Well, in a sense, you look at the Bears, they still have the GSH on everything for George Halas.
To memorialize him.
And here we are. 40 some odd years later,
we're still mourning. Yeah. So with the Bears being the exception there, but in the movie, and this was a way of life in America back in like, I don't know, 40s, 50s, maybe 60s, that grieving families wore that patch. And maybe in our society we'd say, oh, that's cruel. But maybe it's an outward sign of like, hey, I should remember that they're going through a rough thing right now, and I should have some compassion.
Or if they maybe take out their frustration because of something, because they're grieving, because
you'll know why.
It might come out in anger, and they might lash out because they're just grieving, and it comes out in that way because everybody handles it differently, so they show different emotions. Or like, as you were talking, I was thinking about like when we think of like a funeral, even though here at Emmanuel we call a celebration of life, to some people feel like, oh, I can't make jokes. It's got to be serious and somber. Mm-hmm. But then you go and you look at like New Orleans and how they do like a funeral or celebration of life. It is one big party with like the jazz band and like the upbeat music marching through the city. Like I think it was the 2016 National Youth Gathering in New Orleans. Yeah, that was the last time I was in New Orleans. But like they always do, which is just heartbreaking. They always take the last night, they go through and they show a picture of like people that attended or could have attended this one that were planning on it that passed away. And that's really hard and sad because it is a lot of teenagers. When like they were doing that the one year and they had a very like somber kind of, I think it was like Amazing Grace playing. And then as it kind of wrapped up, it started to transition that version of, I think like said Amazing Grace into this like upbeat jazzy version of giving that like hope, and that was like that really like cool and brought in that New Orleans vibe. Right. But for others, they might be like, well, that's disrespectful. How can you do? But that's the way their culture is. Right.
Yeah, it's really interesting, from culture to culture, and I think we saw a little of that in Cambodia. Like, at least I did when I went there. Like, just the burial way they bury their loved ones, and with big mounds and things of that nature. So every culture has something different, but I can only speak of what we know, and
Right.
and at times, having in the last few years gone through some losses, I just think like I need more time, and then when and people are so gracious, they like take what time you need, and then at some point you're like, I feel guilty because I should be
Back to doing
get backing into things because now I'm like letting people down, and so it's this struggle of like taking the time but yet getting back into the game, for lack of a better word.
And even with that, like I think that we shouldn't be judgmental of people of how they grieve.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think of like, plenty of times when we've done funerals, some people stick around to see them like lower the casket.
Yep.
Or even I've seen where they wait until all the dirt is put back on the casket. And some people don't stick around for that.
Yeah.
And I was like, it is what it is. I never want to judge somebody because they
No.
don't. I'm like, I can see both sides of it. Like I know when my grandma passed, yes, the family, we waited there until they lowered her casket into the ground.
Yeah.
But some don't want to see that.
It sure brings on strong feelings either way, right? Like the one that when you brought that up, I remembered one family that the grave people asked, do you want to remain here? And someone said yes. And for the most part, the group agreed. But there was one person who was like, I can't watch this.
Right.
So they tried to kind of stand there, and then at some point, I think it was when they were putting the dirt up there, they turned around and they're like, I cannot watch this. And it's like, it's okay. You don't need to.
Do what you need to do to help process the grief, and hopefully everybody around isn't judgmental. Like, well, why? Oh, they couldn't suck it up and be there like everybody else was.
Right. Yeah.
But I think that's an important thing, is that like whatever stage somebody's on, or if they even revert back in a stage, no judgment, because everybody grieves differently. We don't know what they're going through, what triggered those different emotions.
So to the stages of grief. So we're going to start with the 5, and this is based on a study called the Kubler-Ross model. And the 5 stages are this: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So with each, I think we have short little paragraphs that maybe PD, you and I can just alternate on that.
Okay.
So you want to start us off with denial?
So yeah, do you want me to read the whole section for denial?
Yeah, I think it's worthy.
Okay, I wasn't sure if we were breaking up the paragraphs.
Yeah.
So we're breaking up the stages. Okay.
Yeah.
So grief is an overwhelming emotion. It's not unusual to respond to the strong and often sudden feelings by pretending the loss or change isn't happening. Denying it gives you time to more gradually absorb the news and begin to process it. This is a common defense mechanism and helps numb you to the intensity of the situation. As you move out of the denial stage, however, the emotions you've been hiding will begin to rise. You'll be confronted with a lot of sorrow you've denied. That is also part of the journey of grief, but it can be difficult.
Yeah. I saw this firsthand in our family's loss recently, and the denial of it was such a shock. So I think like shock brings denial, and I think shock was one of those other of the 7 that another model may have. I saw it like firsthand from someone. Like I can't even say that this happened. This person was saying like, I don't even want to talk about it. I don't even want to even like call anybody up to say that it happened, because
if I speak it into existence,
yes,
it's real.
Yeah, and I just sat there and I was like, I have never seen such strong denial in my life, but it made sense because of the utter shock of it all. And so for this to say that it is what did it say? It was like a coping mechanism, a common defense mechanism, and helps numb you to the intensity.
Right, and it even has like examples of the denial stage. And since we're talking more of a death of a loved one, their example, they said she's not gone; she'll come around the corner any second. and people think, oh, this person's just going to bounce back.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I think I saw that with my grandmother, where it's like she had a lot of health issues over the last 7 years, where she wasn't even expected to live that long, but she kept bouncing back. Where it's like, oh, she'll get through this.
Yep.
She'll get through this.
Yeah.
And then after a while, 96 years old, there's a lot of wear and tear on your body.
Yep.
And you just can't handle it all. But it's that denial, like, oh, they'll get better. And then when it happens when they die, that denial is so sunk in already.
Yep.
And I think the suddenness, like the one you were talking about with your family recently, that is that shock. And it's like, no, this can't be real.
This can't be real. Yeah. Yeah, we must be misinterpreting something here. Like, yeah, it can't be real. So and it's a strong one, that denial. And then you go into stage 2, which is anger. And it says, where denial may be considered a coping mechanism, anger is a masking effect. Anger is hiding many of the emotions and pain that you carry. This anger may be redirected at other people, such as a person who died, your ex, or your old boss. You may even aim your anger at inanimate objects. While your rational brain knows the object of your anger isn't to blame, your feelings in that moment are too intense to act according to that. Anger may mask itself in feelings like bitterness or resentment, and it may not be clear-cut fury or rage. Not everyone will experience this stage of grief. Others may linger here. So there's an example of that. As the anger subsides, however, you may begin to think more rationally about what's happening and feel the emotions you've been pushing aside. So I see a lot of this of like the masking effect of, and there's other ways of the mask coming up. I think sometimes apart from anger, there could be just flight. I'm
fight or flight kind of response.
I'm just like going, I don't want to be here in this house because that's where my loved one was. So I'm going to be everywhere else. And I think that's a masking of a pain.
Right, that is almost out of sight, out of mind. If you don't think about it, oh, I'm not really, but you're not processing. I think that's the key with all of this is that when we do suffer grief, we have to process it. We can't just ignore it or turn to things of this world. Well, some people might turn to alcohol or drugs. But the problem with that is the issue's still there once you sober up.
Right.
And, we need to trust in the Lord and process and go through that process so that we can fully heal.
Yeah. And this anger, I like how it says it's directed at people or it's directed at things. One thing this article doesn't get to, a lot of people direct their anger at God.
Right. Like, why would God let this happen?
Exactly.
God's so loving, he wouldn't do this.
Mm-hmm. And this happens to really Christians who are mature in their walk, and they become very angry at God, or they'll become very angry at people who say godly, caring things. Like, right. I just want you to know we're praying for you. We'll stop it, because it's not helping me.
Right. Like you see that especially after a national tragedy when people say, well, thoughts and prayers.
Yeah.
And you have the kind of non-Christian side like, well, what good are your thoughts and prayers really doing?
Mm-hmm.
You have that anger towards
I'm still at a loss here.
Right.
It hasn't like taken away the loss or restored it.
Yeah, if you're like, you're not really doing anything by that.
Mm-hmm. But it is interesting how while it says while your rational brain knows that an object of your anger isn't to blame, your feelings are really intense.
Right.
And so this is
you just got to get your emotions out one way, so you just take it on whatever is closest to you, whether it's not usually the root of what is causing that.
Well, and you just said something there. Get rid of it to the things that are closest to you. A lot of times your own family members are closest to you,
right.
And someone might spurt out in anger. And, that's where grace really is an important thing, because sometimes in these stages, people say things or act certain ways that just are not normally them. And so we have to try and extend grace, even if it hurts or stings, even while we're grieving too.
And I think of I know you and I have talked about this, but where, maybe something happens here and because of our roles as pastors, we can't show the emotion or frustration or whatever here. And then when you go home, you snap and take it out on your family or somebody close to you because they're just like, well, this is a safe spot, so I'm just going to take it out on them, when that person had nothing to do with that.
Right.
And it's just, it feels safe, and sadly we take it out sometimes on those closest to us.
Yeah, for sure. All right, you want to go into number 3?
Yeah, so number 3 is bargaining. During grief, you may feel vulnerable and helpless. In those moments of intense emotions, it's not uncommon to look for ways to regain control or to want to feel like you can affect the outcome of an event. In the bargaining stage of grief, you may find yourself creating a lot of what if and if only statements. It's also not uncommon for religious individuals to try to make a deal or a promise to God or a higher power in return for healing or relief from this grief and pain. Bargaining is a line of defense against the emotions of grief. It helps you postpone the sadness, confusion, or hurt. And how many times you hear people like, oh, well, God, if you do this, I'm going to come back to church, right? I'm going to do blah, 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 blah. And then maybe the thing happens that they want, and they don't really follow through.
Yeah.
Or God doesn't do what they want, and they're like, well, see, God, you don't really care.
Yeah.
And it goes back to that anger.
Yeah. This bargaining, that last sentence is so right, spot on. It's like this bargaining of your emotions to postpone the sadness, confusion, or hurt. It's trying to get around it, right? Or delay it.
Right.
And it's inevitable.
Right. I think of like here, the example of bargaining for the death of a loved one says, if only I had called her that night, she wouldn't be gone. And like, I especially think of that in the cases like suicide.
Yes, I was just thinking that too.
That idea of like, well, if I would have done this,
yeah,
that person would have done that. I mean, I think of the youth from my vicarage congregation that committed suicide, which was a year after I left because I was getting ready to go to Salem, my first congregation, and I got the news that this youth, 18, 19-year-old person from my congregation committed suicide. And like when I found that out, I was like, man, why didn't I say, hey, here's my new cell phone number if you need anything, because I shared it with some of the other youth from that congregation, but didn't think, because throughout the year I didn't keep as much contact with him as maybe some of the other ones did. But it's that bargaining, like, if I would have done that, could have it changed something?
Yeah. And that really only leads to survivor's guilt.
Right. Their survivor's remorse.
Yeah, right. And, it's... Again, it says it's not uncommon to look for ways to regain control or to want to feel like you can affect the outcome. So, I mean, that's really, if I'd have done this, it wouldn't have happened, the whole what if statement.
And that control, I think that's such a big part of what's ingrained in us, that we want to be in control of our own destiny. And when something's out of our control, we do not like that. We feel uncomfortable, and it can spiral out in a lot of different emotions.
Oh, that hits it right there, because, I mean, that's what death is. You are not in control. You are not at all in control. And our lives, every moment of our life, we're planners, we're task-oriented, we're short-term goals, long-range goals, all these things, because we're in control. And then when the carpet comes out, you're not in control anymore.
I think it was Francis Chan or somebody I know was like, we're silly when we think that, oh, well, I'm going to go, something like, oh, well, I got this vacation plan. Well, you might, but God might have different plans.
Exactly.
God just probably maybe laughs like, oh, you think that's what's going to happen. And we just need to trust God that, I think a professor I had at seminary, he's like, God is God and you are not. And, God is God. He's the one in control. And I just need to trust him. Yeah. And be like, okay, it's in his hands and not in mine.
Yeah, that whole control thing, I remember just a quick personal sharing in the year that our family lost 4 people in the matter of like 6 months. I remember at my brother-in-law's passing, I was trying to keep control of things. And I don't know, I had this encounter with a train conductor because I couldn't buy the ticket at the train station, and I'm trying to get it on my phone app, and it wasn't working, and I'm like, I'm trying to get this on, and he goes, well, you're gonna have to get off, and so I'm like, fine, I'll just get off, and he was just not kind. And he and I had a little bit of an exchange, and he's like, I was like, fine, I'll just leave. And so I got off at Arlington Park, and I'm like, I'm just going to go buy a ticket and pay it. And they're like, well, thanks, but you already rode the thing. We can't do that. And I go, I'm just trying to stay in control, right? Like, and then I bought the stinking ticket, but they said keep it. So I walked away, and I just had a meltdown. And I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I can't be in control, God. I'm like shouting out to God. Like, I felt completely out of control, and so I get it.
If I remember, then you walked back to
I walked back to Emmanuel. And it was like a 3-mile walk.
How long did it take you?
I don't even know.
I thought you said like an hour or something.
It probably was like an hour and a half.
But I'm
just
like thinking, I was like, okay, when the Bears moved to Arlington Heights, wishful thinking.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, that's how long of a walk it is from here to.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's kind of what you walked if you get an Uber out of Soldier Field.
It kind of is.
So I was like, come on, Bears.
Yeah, right. All right. Stage 4 is depression. And whereas anger and bargaining can feel very active, depression may feel like a quiet stage of grief. In the early stages of loss, you may be running from emotions, trying to stay a step ahead of them. So true. By this point, however, you may be able to embrace and work through them in a more healthful manner. You may also choose to isolate yourself from others in order to fully cope with the loss. That doesn't mean, however, that depression is easy or well-defined. Like the other stages of grief, depression can be difficult and messy. It can feel overwhelming. It may feel foggy. You used that word before. Heavy and confused. Depression may still feel like the inevitable landing point of any loss. However, if you feel stuck here and can't seem to move past this stage of grief, you can talk with a mental health expert. A therapist can help you work through this period of coping. And here in the examples of that depression stage and the death of a loved one, what am I without that person? Is what someone might say. Like they lose sense of purpose, right?
Right.
And so, but yeah, that it's a paralyzing kind of stage to be in.
Right, and it can lead to even you harming yourself. Like, that when you're talking about that purpose, what am I without her? I think of like maybe people that are senior citizens that have retired from their job, that they could have that depression of like, well, what's my purpose now in this world? Because I have found all my purpose in this, and like in this case of like losing a loved one, you could say, I found my purpose in being that person's spouse or being that person's parent.
Yes.
Now, where's my purpose? Because I'm not that person's spouse anymore.
Now I don't even know who I am.
Right.
And so I don't even know how to begin to take the next step. So it's all very, very understanding.
And that's where I was just looking at the thing that stood out to me right as I looked at my screen. It can feel overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what it feels like. It's overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was thinking of like when I did my grandma's funeral, like that happened on a Saturday, and then it was Memorial Day weekend. I remember waking up on Memorial Day because I just couldn't sleep, sad. I don't know if truly depressed, but it was a sad time.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I just can't sleep. I'm thinking too much, kind of that overwhelming. I'm like, I got to write this funeral sermon. I was like, you know what? It's 4 a.m. I'm awake. I can't sleep. Got my laptop, brought it into my bed, and I just typed away because it was just like, I can't think about anything else right now.
Mm-hmm.
This is something I can do, and maybe this will help the sadness of just like getting it out. Now not having that like over my head of like, I got to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, writing funeral sermons for family members isn't easy because not only are you trying to comfort the people who are grieving, you're one of those people grieving.
Yeah, right.
I mean, yeah, you grieve when we lose a church member, but this is a lot closer because it's personal.
Yeah.
And it's like that dual thing of like comforting people and also comforting myself in those words.
It's almost like that phrase in the Bible, physician, heal thyself. Right. Like, so you as the one bringing the healing message, begin to feel some healing too. And that's where, when you were describing the typing it out at 4 a.m, I'm like, that was therapeutic for you. You needed that,
right.
And that's part of getting through the depressing stages. And that foggy feeling, heavy or confused, can go in and out one day over another. Like you could have a really good day or a few good days, and then wham, you're just like knocked down, like in a fog, and it might be evident in your workplace or your school where people are like, "Are you all right?" Oh yeah, I'm just, I'm just like I have a hard time focusing.
Right, because it can even be like months or like, you think about like with the different triggers, especially holidays are a trigger. That's why I know for Grief Share there is that special one about surviving the holidays.
Right.
But it could be maybe something you see on TV or like a song, because if that song was like a special song between you and that person or like something you knew that person loved, when you see that, that's what you think of. Like I think of when I was a child after my grandfather passed away, one of the songs they sang at his funeral was How Great Thou Art. I remember for the longest time as a child, my grandmother couldn't stay in the sanctuary anytime we sang that.
Wow.
Because it would just trigger and like she'd be in tears. And even now, like when I hear that song, granted I was only 3, 4, almost 4 when my grandpa passed, I still think of him whenever I sing How Great Thou Art. And a lot of times you'll see me looking up to heaven or just looking up because I'm thinking about him, especially during the chorus, because it is that trigger of, okay, this song, I'm connecting to this loss.
Yeah. Even coming to church could be a trigger for people,
Right.
like because the last time maybe they were at the church was during the funeral of their loved one. And so returning is a huge hill to climb. Right. And boy, that's a tough one because that's the place where we hear the words of comfort from our Lord. Right. But yet we're struggling through depression or any other of these stages, and it prevents us from going. So I think you're on the last one, right?
Yeah.
Acceptance.
So says acceptance is not necessarily a happy or uplifting stage of grief. It doesn't mean you move past the grief or loss. It does, however, mean that you accepted it and have come to understand what it means in your life now. You may feel very different in this stage. That's entirely expected. You've had a major change in your life, and that upends the way you feel about many things. Look to acceptance as a way to see that there may be more good days than bad days. There may be still bad, and that's okay. And the kind of example for a death of a loved one, I'm so fortunate to have had so many wonderful years with him, and he will always be in my memories. And that, to me, reminds me of like when my grandma passed. Like that was one of the first deaths of a family member I knew that was going to affect me. But I was also like, I was blessed enough to have 36 years. I think it was like 36 years with Ma. I'm like, not everybody can say that with a grandparent and have that close relationship. I'm like 36, 37 years with her. I'm like, that's pretty fortunate.
Well, and like you've had some really important moments in life with your grandma.
Right.
And the one that I was a part of was when you were installed here at Emmanuel. And I remember how proud she was when she walked in that narthex. And I don't know, she said something like, I'm 90-something years old and I'm not missing this, you know.
And like, honestly, that was probably the last time she was ever in a church.
Wow.
And like, because even before that, she was pretty much a shut-in and wasn't worshiping at my home church, or home congregation. So yeah, that was the last time she was in a church for a worship service. And, you saying that, I'm like, I've thought about it, and like, I'm just thinking, I was like, yeah, that was the last time she was in a church service. Wow. And what a kind of special thing that is.
Yeah, right. So there it is. It's like, I'm blessed to have had this or these many years. I'm blessed with so much that we've had together and enjoyed together. Right. The one that I lost, that you begin to thankfulness and gratitude kind of take over.
Because like, I was talking about my grandfather. I was like, I was 3 when he passed. I'm like, he didn't get to see any of like high school graduation, college, seminary. Never got to see me be a pastor. I'm like, man, that kind of stinks. So that's maybe some of that anger. Like, why didn't he get to be able to witness that?
Right.
Compared to like my grandma, I'm like, she got to witness all those things.
Yeah. These are questions that we don't know answers
to. But you just gotta say, you know what? That's God's plan. I don't understand, but I accept it.
Yeah. Right. Well, that's the 5 stages, and we'll just kind of wrap up just going through the 7 stages that they list in this article. And I don't know that we'll talk about the things. How about we just say the title, and then we'll let you guys kind of think about this. So the first one, why don't we alternate?
Sounds good.
First one is shock and denial, which is kind of what I talked about earlier.
Pain and guilt, which we talked about, of like I could have done more.
Anger and bargaining. So there's two that were brought together.
Right. Depression.
The upward turn.
Okay, so that's like getting back to that, like, okay, things are getting better.
Yeah, I've kind of hit my low, going back up.
Reconstruction and working through. So just putting the pieces back together. This is the new normal. It kind of goes to that Chad Bird tweet I've shared in the past where he's like, God he puts back the pieces of our brokenness. They're not perfectly put back together. They're scarred and like broken, just like he was.
Yeah. Oh, that's really well said. And then lastly, acceptance and hope. I like the addition of hope.
Right.
Because with acceptance, you can find hope, and so forth. So those are, the 5 stages and the 7 stages that this article brought forward. So, I think if you just Google the stages of grief and what to expect, there's more for you to dig into.
And I can probably put a link to this article in there.
That'd be great. And thank you, brother, for having a good discussion on this. And we hope that it's been fruitful for everybody today.
Yeah, thank you, and God's blessings.